My family told me to pay $28,000 for my sister's wedding or lose them forever. Madison smiled and said I had nothing else to spend it on. I reached for the folder they never knew I kept. My father delivered the ultimatum at my own dinner table, in my own house, eating food I had bought and cooked, with a calm that could only come from a man who had never once considered that I might say no. $28,000, he said, for Madison's venue and catering deposit. You pay it, or you're done with this family. Madison didn't look up from her nails. You don't have anything else to spend it on anyway, she said. You're single. You just work. At least this way your money means something. I felt something click off inside me. Not anger. Anger is hot, and this was the opposite of hot. This was the specific cold that settles in when you finally stop being surprised. I smiled. I reached across the table and picked up the venue invoice they'd slid toward me like a contract already signed. I folded it in half. I need to think about it, I said, and I started clearing the plates. I had been a property attorney at Holt & Wren for 7 years when my father lost his job. I say this not to establish status, but to establish context, because the story doesn't make sense without understanding what I do for a living. Property law isn't glamorous. Nobody makes a TV show about it, but it teaches you something that turns out to be extraordinarily useful. Document everything, because the person who controls the paper controls the outcome. I had learned that in law school. I had reinforced it across hundreds of real estate disputes. I applied it eventually to my own life, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Laura Chen. I am 34 years old. I own a 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb that I purchased at 28 with a down payment I saved for 4 years while living in a studio apartment that smelled like someone else's cooking and had a radiator that sounded like a small, angry animal at night. The house is mine. Every square foot of it, purchased with money I earned and saved with a deliberateness that my family always interpreted as joylessness. You work too much, my mother used to say. You need to live a little, Madison used to say. When are you going to find someone? My father used to say. I was living as it turned out. I was just living differently than they understood, and the gap between those two things would eventually become the entire problem. My father, Robert Chen, lost his marketing director position in February, 3 years and 4 months before the dinner table ultimatum. His company restructured. He was 57, experienced, and I say this with the specific sorrow of a person who genuinely loves a parent despite everything, had spent 20 years in a career without building any of the financial cushion a person should accumulate over that time. My mother, Patricia, had worked part-time for most of my childhood, and then not at all after Madison was born, which is relevant because Madison was 22 years younger than me, the product of what my parents described as a wonderful surprise, and what I privately understood as evidence that my parents had always preferred not to plan ahead. Madison, at the time my father lost his job, was 20 years old and finishing community college. She was beautiful in the specific, effortless way of people who have never been told they aren't the most important person in the room. She had large, dark eyes and perfect posture, and a gift for making her selfishness sound like candor. Tyler Marsh, her fiancé, was 23 and worked in sales and had proposed with a ring that cost, I later calculated, approximately 4 months of his salary. They'd been together 11 months. My father called me on a Thursday evening. "We're in trouble, Laura B." He hadn't called me that since I was a child. I noticed it. "How bad?" I asked. "We need somewhere to stay, just for a few months, while I get back on my feet." I said yes, because he was my father, and he had called me Laura B, and because I have, somewhere underneath all the documentation and the practicality, a functional heart that responds to my father calling me by the name he used when I was small. A few months. That was the agreement. They arrived on a Saturday in March, with 2 suitcases each and a moving truck I had not known about, which contained 2 additional suitcases, my mother's entire kitchen equipment collection, my father's golf clubs, and Madison's bedroom furniture, which my mother installed in my master bedroom because it was, she explained, the only room large enough for Madison's bed frame. I slept in the guest room for the next 3 years and 4 months. The first month was difficult but manageable. I told myself that was normal. Adjustment takes time. 3 people in a house built for one creates friction that settles. It didn't settle. My electric bill went from $94 to $271 by April. Madison ran the air conditioning on 68 degrees continuously. She also had an electric hair tool collection that operated simultaneously every morning from 7 to 9 a.m. I mentioned the electricity bill once, gently, in passing. "We'll pay you back when we're on our feet," Dad said. They were never on their feet. Not in the way that translated into paying me back. By May, my grocery budget had expanded from $280 a month to $680. I know this precisely because I tracked it. I tracked it because I am a lawyer and lawyers track things. I also tracked it because I had started, somewhere around the 3rd week of April, to feel the particular unease of someone who suspects they are being confused with a resource rather than treated as a person. My father drove my Subaru to job interviews. This was fine. My car sat in the garage and I took the commuter rail. What was less fine was that he also drove it to his Thursday golf game and his weekend visits with his college friends, returning it each time with the gas gauge near empty, and, on one memorable occasion, a parking ticket in the glove compartment and what appeared to be a fast food milkshake stain on the passenger seat. "Your dad's been using your car?" my colleague Nina asked when I mentioned the parking ticket. "Just while he's looking for work," I said. She gave me a look. I ignored it. My mother rearranged my kitchen twice. The first time I noticed because I couldn't find my coffee mugs. The second time I noticed confused because my spice rack had been reorganized alphabetically, which sounds efficient until you realize I cook by region, and the entire system I'd developed over 4 years was gone. "You'll thank me," she said. Madison, for her part, contributed nothing to the household economically, but contributed consistently to the household in terms of social events. Her friends came over on Friday nights. Tyler was there most evenings by month 3, eating dinner and using the guest bathroom and watching sports on the television I had bought. He never offered to contribute anything, and more importantly, neither Madison nor my parents ever suggested he should. I said nothing about any of this. I said nothing because these were my parents, and saying something felt like an accusation. An accusation felt like cruelty, and I had been raised in a family that treated inconvenient honesty as a form of cruelty. What I did instead was start a spreadsheet, not for revenge. I want to be clear about that. I started it because I am a lawyer, and because structuring a problem makes it feel smaller, and because somewhere in the back of my mind I understood that a few months was becoming something else entirely, and that clarity would eventually matter. Every expense, every date, every amount. The folder, physically, a green accordion file I kept in my locked filing cabinet at the office, grew slowly and methodically over the course of 3 years. The second year brought changes that were harder to absorb quietly. My father found work in August, 14 months after moving in. Contract consulting, part-time, $40 an hour. He was genuinely relieved, and I was genuinely glad for him. And for 3 weeks, I allowed myself to believe the phrase, "getting back on his feet," was becoming literal. Then I came home from a 14-hour day to find my mother had signed us up for a weekly meal delivery service on my credit card. "I attached it to your card because mine isn't working," she explained. "We'll sort it out." They did not sort it out. I canceled the service 2 months later after $140 in charges. My mother was annoyed. She called me rigid. My father's consulting work remained part-time. He did not look for full-time work with any particular urgency, as far as I could tell. He golfed on Thursdays. He watched television in the evenings. He occasionally brought up job leads at dinner, naming companies and positions that never materialized into applications. I started to understand that the job search had become a performance. Not dishonest exactly, but shaped more to reassure me than to produce results. The thing about families is that they develop their own grammar. A look that means, "don't push this." A subject change that means you're being difficult. A silence that means you're hurting us by noticing. My family had very sophisticated grammar, and they had been speaking it to me for 34 years, and part of me was still fluent in it even when I didn't want to be. Which is why, when I sat down with my father in the living room in September of year 2 and said, carefully and without accusation, "Dad, I want to talk about a timeline. When do you think you'll be able to move out?" And he looked at me with that expression, the one that meant, "How could you?" The one that made me the problem. I let it go. I updated the spreadsheet instead. Madison announced her engagement in October of that year. Tyler Marsh, who by this point had eaten approximately 400 dinners in my house without once buying groceries, had proposed at a rooftop restaurant using a ring that Madison photographed from 14 angles and posted immediately. My mother cried. My father shook Tyler's hand. Madison held her hand at various angles near the dining room light I had chosen and installed myself. "I'm so happy for you," I said. I was, actually. Complicated and exhausted, but genuinely happy for my sister, who was 22 and in love and had no concept of what anything cost. That was October. By November, I knew the wedding was being planned around my money, because Madison said so. She didn't say it that bluntly, of course. She said it the way she said most things, as a self-evident fact that only a difficult person would question. "The Whitmore estate is $22,000 for the venue alone," she said at dinner, "plus catering, plus the dress. Tyler's family is contributing $5,000. She paused. "Obviously, Laura will handle the rest." I set down my fork. "Obviously?" I said. "You don't have anyone to spend it on," she said completely sincerely. "It's not like you're saving for a wedding or kids or anything." There it was. Not meanness, exactly. Something more exhausting than meanness. The genuine belief that my money was a communal resource whose allocation she had the right to determine, because she had a use for it and I, in her estimation, did not. I said I would think about it. That night, I called Diane Kowalski. Diane was a colleague at Holt & Wren, 11 years in family and tenancy law, the kind of attorney who could explain your legal position in 2 sentences and then tell you exactly what to do about it. She had been my informal advisor since my parents moved in, and she had been, over the course of 2 years, increasingly direct. "You know how this ends," she told me on the phone that November. "I know. The question is whether you're going to control the ending or let it happen to you." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Then I made an appointment with Greg Osman. Greg was a residential tenancy attorney, 23 years of practice, a reputation for being completely unflappable, and a specific expertise in the legal status of long-term house guests, which is a category that most people don't realize is meaningfully different from tenants, but which has its own procedural requirements. I sat in Greg's office on a Tuesday lunch hour with my accordion file and walked him through 31 months of documentation. He read for a long time without speaking. "You've kept all of this," he said finally. "I'm a property attorney," I said. "It's a reflex." He looked at me over his glasses. "Your family has been residing in your home for over 2 years without any formal rental agreement, without contributing to household expenses, and against an initial understanding of a temporary arrangement. Yes, under state law, that classifies them as licensees, not tenants. The notice requirements are different. You cannot simply change the locks. You need to provide written notice and a reasonable period to vacate. In this state, 72 hours is considered reasonable for licensees who have not been paying rent. 72 hours, I repeated. Once you provide notice, if they don't leave, you can request police assistance to remove them as trespassers. The small claims complication is that your sister could potentially file for emotional damages, though any such claim would be extremely difficult to sustain against the documentation you have here. He tapped the folder. This is thorough, he said. This is very, very thorough. I know, I said. You should make copies. Store them separately. I already had. I did not act immediately. That's important to understand. I went home that Tuesday and made dinner and listened to my mother describe Madison's dress appointment in detail and watched my father read a golf magazine at my table. And I did not say a word about what I had spent the last hour learning because I wasn't ready, not because I was afraid. Because I had learned from 7 years of property law, from hundreds of disputes, from watching people blow up cases by moving too fast. That timing is everything. You do not act until the conditions are right. You do not show your position until the moment it will have the maximum effect. The conditions became right on a Sunday in February. It was a family dinner. Madison and Tyler, my parents. Food I had made, my table, my house. Madison was talking about the Whitmore estate again. The venue, the pricing, the deposit deadline. She had brochures. She had a color palette. She had a seating chart that was not, I noticed, an actual chart yet, but was clearly becoming one in her mind. The deposit is due in 6 weeks, she said. $28,000 for venue and catering combined. I looked at my father. He looked at me, and then he said it. Laura, you need to pay for this. Not asked, not requested, stated. Your family, he said. This is what family does. It's not like you're doing anything else with it, Madison said. She was looking at her nails. She genuinely could not locate the part of her that understood what she was saying. You're single. You just work. At least this way your money means something. I felt that click. That cold, clean, absolute click. I smiled. I picked up the venue invoice they'd slid toward me. I folded it in half. I need to think about it, I said. What's there to think about? Madison said. Either you love family or you don't. I started clearing plates. Inside, I was already moving. That night, I sat in my guest room, in my house, and I opened my laptop and I typed a very specific document. It was a notice of termination of license to occupy. Greg Osmond had drafted the template for me 3 months earlier and told me to hold it until I was ready. It named all 3 occupants. It cited 37 months of residence. It provided 72 hours to vacate the property, beginning at 9 a.m. the following morning. I printed 3 copies. Then I called Greg. I'm ready, I said. Have you arranged the locksmith? He asked. For Thursday at noon. Good. A pause. How do you feel? Clear, I said. And I meant it. Clear was exactly the right word. Like something that had been sitting at an angle for 3 years had finally been set level. Call me immediately if there's any issue with removal, he said. Do not engage in extended argument. Deliver the notice, state the deadline, and refer any further conversation to me. At 7 the next morning, I knocked on my father's door. He opened it still half asleep, hair uncombed, wearing the bathrobe he kept on a hook in what used to be my master bathroom. I handed him the notice. You have until Thursday at 9 p.m. to be out, I said. The locksmith comes at noon Thursday. If you're still here after 9, I'll be calling the police. He read it. His face went through confusion, then disbelief, then something that collapsed inward. You can't be serious? I've scheduled the locksmith. My mother appeared in the hallway. She looked at the paper in his hands. She looked at me. Her expression shifted into the specific, horrified performance of a woman who has never had her expectations challenged and finds the experience genuinely bewildering. Laura, this is your family. I know, I said. Madison emerged from my bedroom in silk pajamas. She read the notice over my father's shoulder. Then she started shouting. Not words exactly, just volume. The specific pitch of a person who has confused being heard with being right. We have rights, she said. You can't just throw us out. As long-term guests without a rental agreement, I said. You have fewer rights than you think. Greg Osmond can explain the specifics. His number is on the bottom of the page. My father stepped forward, red in the face, larger than the doorway in a way that was probably meant to be intimidating. If you do this, he said, you've chosen money over family. I looked at him. You chose money, I said, when you moved in and decided mine belonged to all of you. I walked back to my room and closed the door. Thursday came and they were still there, not packing, sitting, all 3 of them, arranged in my living room like a still life of people who have decided their feelings constitute a legal argument. Suitcases near the door, but not at the door. Madison on her phone. My mother with her hands folded in her lap and her martyrdom face fully deployed. My father with his arms crossed, watching me the way men watch situations they believe they can still manage. I had expected this. Greg had expected this. I picked up my phone at 9:03 p.m. and dialed 911. What are you doing? My mother's voice cracked. Reporting trespassers, I said. My father stood up immediately. Fine, we're going. My mother paused at the door. She had arranged her tears perfectly, the way she always did. Not streaming, just present, just visible enough to function as an accusation without requiring words. I hope you're happy, she said. I hope I will be, I said. And I meant it entirely. They were gone by 9:40 p.m. The officers, Deputy Marcus Ellis and Deputy Karen Vong, both professional and brief, confirmed the property was clear and noted the date and time in their log. I thanked them. I closed my front door. I stood in my living room for a long time. It was quiet. My house. Quiet. I had forgotten what that sounded like. like. The campaign began within 48 hours. My Aunt Patricia called 3 times on Friday. My Uncle Robert texted about family values at 11 a.m. on Saturday. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 6 years sent a Facebook message using the phrase, "blood is thicker than water," as though it were an original thought. My mother's hairdresser, a woman named Sandra, who I had met exactly twice, sent me a direct message on Instagram that began with, "I know this isn't my place, but..." The story being circulated was clean and simple. Heartless Laura, financially stable and emotionally stunted, had thrown her struggling parents and sweet younger sister into the street out of jealousy over the wedding. They were good at the story. My family had always been good at stories. They understood narrative instinctively, who the sympathetic character was, which details to emphasize, how to frame self-interest as sacrifice and self-protection as cruelty. What they consistently underestimated was documentation. I did not respond to relatives. I did not post anything. I did not call anyone to explain myself. I went to work on Monday morning with my green accordion file, and I told Diane Kowalski over coffee in the break room what had happened, and she nodded in the specific way of someone who is not surprised. "Madison will file something," Diane said. "Probably," I agreed. "Small claims, most likely. Emotional distress, wrongful removal, something." "I know. Will you represent yourself?" "Yes," I said. She looked at me steadily. "You're sure?" "Diane," I said, "I have 37 months of receipts." Madison filed 6 weeks later. The claim was for $8,500 in emotional damages and what she described as wrongful removal from a family residence. Her filing used the phrase trusted family environment 4 times. She had listed Tyler as a character witness and my mother as a supporting declarant. She had, in the section asking her to describe the harm she suffered, written a paragraph that included the sentence, "I was treated like a stranger in a home I had come to rely on." I read the filing in Greg Osmond's office on a Tuesday afternoon. "She has no legal basis," Greg said. "Licensees have no claim for emotional damages upon termination of a license, and wrongful removal requires a tenancy relationship that demonstrably does not exist here." "I know," I said, "but I want to show her what the folder is." He looked at me. "I want her to sit in a courtroom and watch me open it," I said. "I want her to hear what 37 months looks like itemized." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not a legal objective." "No," I said. "It's a personal one, and the legal outcome will be the same either way." He almost smiled. "Fair enough. Let's prepare." Hartwell County Small Claims Court convenes on Tuesday and Thursday mornings in Courtroom B, a room that smells like old carpet and fluorescent lights, and the specific anxiety of people who have come to argue about money in front of a stranger with a gavel. Madison arrived in a dress that cost more than most people's car payments. Deep burgundy, structured shoulders, the kind of outfit that says I am a serious person who has been wronged. Tyler sat behind her in the gallery in a sport coat. My mother sat next to him in black, as though attending a funeral she had caused. I arrived in the navy suit I wore to depositions, my green accordion file on the table in front of me. The judge was the Honorable Raymond Cho, 58 years old, 21 years on the small claims bench, the kind of man whose expression communicates very little until it communicates everything. He had reviewed the filings, as evidenced by the slight set of his jaw when he opened proceedings. Madison presented first. She had practiced. I could tell because the performance was too smooth, too shaped, the voice that caught at exactly the right moments, the posture of someone deeply wounded who is trying very hard to be dignified. She described moving into my home as an act of family trust. She described the dinner as a reasonable family conversation about shared resources. She described the eviction notice as a shock, a betrayal, an act of cruelty that had caused her significant emotional harm. "She threw us out with nowhere to go," she said. "We were family. We trusted her." Judge Cho looked at her for a moment, then he looked at me. "Ms. Chen, your response?" I opened the folder. I placed the first page on the table, not handed it to the judge yet, just placed it. And I looked at Madison directly, and I felt, for the first time in 3 years and 4 months, the exact weight of what I'd been carrying and the exact moment I was setting it down. "Your Honor," I said, "I have 37 months of bank statements, utility records, grocery receipts, and documented communications showing precisely what the financial reality of this family arrangement looked like." I slid the first stack across. "I would also like to submit Exhibit B, a text message from my mother to our neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, sent in October of year 2, stating that I was experiencing financial hardship and might benefit from community support. This message was sent in the same month I paid a $4,200 out-of-pocket dental bill for my father." A sound from behind Madison, my mother, the sound of someone who had forgotten that text messages are evidence. "Exhibit C is a record of 17 months of utility overage from the documented date of occupancy. Exhibit D is a gas station receipt log showing 41 instances of my vehicle being returned with less than a quarter tank of fuel. Exhibit E, Ms. Chen," Judge Cho's voice was not unkind. "How many exhibits do you have?" 11, I said, "but I can summarize if the court prefers." He looked at me for a moment that was hard to read, then he looked at Madison. And then he said with the quiet, final tone of a man who has made his decision before the question is finished, "Ms. Madison, are you quite certain you want to proceed with this claim?" Madison looked at me. For the first time since they'd moved in, she looked at me the way you look at someone when you realize you don't know them at all. Not the sister she had decided I was. The convenient one. The stable one. The one whose money was available because her life was, in Madison's accounting, empty. She looked at me like a person who has just understood that the ground she'd been standing on was something someone else had built, and that person had been watching very carefully the entire time. She started. Because, Judge Cho continued, his voice still quiet, based on what I'm seeing in these exhibits, the outcome of these proceedings is unlikely to be what you anticipated. Madison looked at Tyler. Tyler looked at his hands. My mother, in the gallery, had gone completely still. Madison dropped the claim, not dramatically. She said 2 sentences to Judge Cho in a voice that had lost all its practiced texture. He noted the withdrawal in the record. He looked at me once more, briefly, appraisingly, the look of a judge who has seen a great deal and occasionally sees something that surprises him. And then he moved on to the next case. I closed the accordion file. I put on my coat. I walked out of Hartwell County Small Claims Court at 10:47 a.m. on a Thursday, into a morning that was cold and bright and entirely mine. My house is very quiet now. Not the hollow quiet of an empty space. The actual quiet of a home that belongs to the person living in it. I repainted the master bedroom in November. I reorganized the kitchen back to my original system in October, which took 45 minutes and felt disproportionately satisfying. I go to the grocery store on Saturday mornings and buy exactly what I need for one person, and the number at the register no longer surprises me because it is, again, a number I chose. My electric bill is $91. My father found full-time work 4 months after leaving, which I heard through peripheral channels, and which I noted with the specific mixture of genuine gladness and bitter irony that I imagine I will carry for some time. My mother sends occasional texts that I respond to briefly and without cruelty, but also without the deference she expects. We are not close. We were not close before, I now understand, even when I thought we were. What we had was my accommodation of her comfort, which is not the same thing. Madison married Tyler in May at the Whitmore estate. Her mother-in-law paid the deposit. I know this because Aunt Patricia mentioned it in a voicemail left approximately 6 months after the small claims case, in which she also attempted to characterize my behavior as a misunderstanding, and suggested we start fresh. I have not returned that call. I may, eventually. I haven't decided. What I have decided is simpler than any of that. I have decided to stop being surprised when people confuse access with entitlement. I have decided to trust the part of myself that noticed things and wrote them down, even when being told I was rigid, difficult, too careful, too clinical, too focused on money to understand what family means. Here is what family means. It means the people who see you clearly and choose to stay. It means relationships built on honesty rather than assumption. It means love that doesn't come with an invoice disguised as obligation. I know what family means. I also know what 37 months of documentation looks like when placed on a courtroom table. And the thing about Madison, the thing she should have understood before she smiled at that dinner table and told me I had nothing else to spend it on, is that a woman who has been underestimated for long enough doesn't get angry. She gets organized.